Hi, everybody. It's Chaplain David. I'm here at home as we are all doing our self isolating thing and working at home for the next several weeks. I know that everybody has been asked to move home from campus, and so a lot of you are in the midst of transitions right now and not sure what's going to happen next. So I just wanted to remind you that we are all here for you, and if you need any assistance or if you need any help or if you just need a listening ear, just to let me know. You can always contact us at chapel@onu.edu. Follow us on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We also have a Pinterest page where we're putting things up for worship arts and things like that as well. So follow us on that. You can also contact me or find me on social media. I'm at ONU Chaplain on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find our religious life page in all those places as well. Want to introduce our guest speaker for this week. Pastor Trevor Wright is the pastor of the Journey at Christ Church in Findlay. He is a 1997 graduate of Mount Union College, now the University of Mount Union. Go Purple Raiders. And several months ago, I asked him if he would be a speaker for chapel today, and he's graciously said yes. But unfortunately, we're not able to do that in person. And so he graciously again agreed to be able to tape his message for us today. And so he's going to be continuing our following the story of King David as we go through our series about David over the next several weeks. So please enjoy Pastor Trevor Wright's message, and I hope that you will be blessed by what he has to say.
Well, greetings from one social distancer to another. I thank God for technology and the capacity to share with you even while we're apart. I was looking forward to joining you at English Chapel this week, and hopefully at some other time we're going to be able to gather together face to face under different circumstances. But until then, we join our hearts together and share together even in our absence. My name is Trevor Wright, and I'm a United Methodist pastor in Findlay, Ohio, and my church is Journey at Christ Church. And I'm also a spiritual director, and I love to walk with individuals on their journey and faith exploration. It's one of my favorite things to do. Well, I'm sharing with you in line with the series and the theme that you've been talking about in chapel about David's life and the ups and downs of it all. I think you've been talking about Saul as king, and then David's anointing as the second king, and then the connection between the two with their relationship and all the intricacies that are involved with that. I say that if you're going to describe their relationship, Saul and David, it was complicated, incredibly complicated and up and down. Today I'm going to take a look at some of the in-between time of David's life, and honestly that's sometimes not the most exciting or the riveting stuff. It's stories that we all know here and there, and then perhaps some details that we forget about. It's the Sunday school version, and we don't always think through all the details. But to be perfectly honest, during this time of life, everything that's going on, all of the questions and all of the fear and the panic and this in-between of unknowing, it's probably good timing for us to talk about this part, this aspect of David's life. I resonate with this because my life has always been built on this idea of waiting. I seem to find myself always in between times of life, as I've always had to wait on the happenings that I sensed was God's call for me, but had not yet happened. I had to wait for them. I remember feeling a really strong sense of a call to youth ministry. I had a heart for working with young people, but as I realized that, I had just signed an apartment lease, and I couldn't line up dates for going to a training that I wanted to go to, and so it was a full year between sensing this call to youth ministry before I could move forward with that. And so I ended up working a full year, third shift weekends in a warehouse while I waited. It was a sort of desert experience for me, but there was a lot of fruit that came out of that waiting. While I was in youth ministry, I began to sense a call to start a new church. I had been in youth ministry for about 7 years, and I felt this sense that I wanted to start a church for people who didn't like church. People who were disillusioned or fed up with the church walked away from church but didn't want away from God. And so we had this sense of starting a church, and it was a full 2 years of waiting for all of the details to line up for that to be able to happen while still staying in youth ministry and having to temper my impatience and my frustration with that situation. Well, several years ago, I began to sense a call to become a spiritual director. And as you can imagine, with the other two examples, there was a lot more waiting. It took numerous steps for things to fall into place, and one thing had to happen before another. And about 3 years of waiting is what I had to go through for that to finally happen, for that to become a reality. So throughout my life, over and over, that's just a handful of examples, over and over, there has been this pattern of seeing clearly a call that God had placed on my life, but having to wait for a green light for quite some time. I don't wait well. I think that's precisely why God has had me wait, because God knows that I don't wait well. But I know that it's in that in-between time where our character is strengthened. It's in that waiting time where seeds that have been planted can germinate, that they can be nurtured until the time when growth happens and ultimately fruit is produced. That's been my story, and I think that that's what David's story really is about. You've already talked about 1 Samuel 16, where the prophet priest Samuel anoints David the shepherd, goes through all of the sons, and finally David is the one that God has called, and he anoints him and blesses him to be the next king. He's the next king, second king after Saul, but he's also the not yet king. He's not yet. You probably talked about that time where he was blessed and anointed, but then in 1 Samuel 16, verses 21 through 23, it says, David came to Saul and entered his service, so brought him into the courts. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, allow David to remain in my service, for I'm pleased with him. Whenever the Spirit from God came on Saul, David would take up his lyre and play. Then relief would come to Saul, he would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. And so David had been literally pulled out of the fields, away from the sheep pen, and then anointed to be the next king. But in the wake of that, David literally sat feet from the throne that he knew eventually would be his, but upon which Saul would sit for approximately 15 more years. And so close yet so far, David had to wait. The story continues of this in-between time and all of these events and happenings. 1 Samuel 17, David defeated Goliath as a young boy. We all know that story. We love that story. But with very little at his disposal, right? The slingshot and a couple of stones. He was faithful to God, and he trusted God's direction and provision and protection in that in-between time, which set him up for the future. In 1 Samuel 18, David eluded an attack by Saul. Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. He was then sent away to lead a small army where everything he did was blessed and successful. Every battle they went into, they won. The men looked up to him as a leader, and things went well with him. In 1 Samuel 19, David eluded 3 more plots to end his life, all the while honoring Saul as the king and not retaliating against Saul for this violence that was being perpetrated against him. Now, if this is me, I'd be done playing nice. Enough of the waiting, enough of being a nice guy. You know, he had this clear call from God. He had this anointing and blessing that came from Samuel, the prophet, priest. He had this clear call from God to be the king, and yet here he was continually running for his life, literally running for his life, escaping the attacks from Saul himself, while winning acclaim on the battlefield and earning the trust of others, but not yet king. Not yet. Waiting. So when would his time come? Could David take matters into his own hands, maybe? Maybe he could put an end to this whole situation. Enough of the waiting and enough of this in-between time. Now was his time, right? That could have been his perspective. Well, skipping a few chapters, because there are a lot of chapters between 1 Samuel 16 and when David finally takes the throne at the beginning of 2 Samuel. In chapter 24 of 1 Samuel, David was still on the run. David and his men were hiding in one of the caves from the attacks of Saul himself and thousands of men of Saul's army right outside the cave. There they were hiding, crouched down in the back of the cave. Well, King Saul entered the cave to relieve himself, it says. And in the meantime, David saw this as an opportunity. He snuck up behind Saul while he was taking care of business, and he cut off the corner of his robe when Saul was not looking. And the story there in 1 Samuel 24, it picks up in verse 5, and let me just read that to you. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off the corner of his robe. He said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." With these words, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his way. Then David went out of the cave and called out to Saul, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He said to Saul, "Why do you listen when men say David is bent on harming you? This day you have seen with your own eyes how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave. Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not lay my hand on my Lord, because he is the Lord's anointed. So my father, look at this piece of your robe in my hand. I cut off the corner of your robe, but did not kill you. See that there's nothing in my hand to indicate that I'm guilty of wrongdoing or rebellion. I have not wronged you, but you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge the wrongs you have done in me, but my hand will not touch you. As the old saying goes, from evildoers come evil deeds, so my hand will not touch you. Like I said before, in this in-between time and in the midst of the wait, that's what develops our character and ultimately produces fruit in our life. And I guess I should say that it can develop character and produce fruit in our life. It doesn't always. We've seen circumstances where that is not true and that is not produced in some people's lives. Now, it would have been easy for David to see this development in a cave as an opportunity to take Saul's life, to finally take the throne. Some might even have looked at it as like, this is a sign from God that his time had come. Enough is enough. My time is now. That could have been his view. But that's not the character and that's not the fruit in David's life that we see. He had been faithful to God, and he'd been faithful to this call on his life. He'd been faithful in this in-between time and in the midst of the waiting. No matter how bad things had gone and how dire life seemed, he was faithful in that wait. His character showed that. That in-between time had brought forth growth and fruit that carried him forward when times were tough. And God blessed him in that faithfulness. So David was anointed as the king. He was blessed. He was called. And the prophet priest Samuel had selected him on God's behalf to serve as the second king of Israel. And yet he had to wait patiently, which gives some renewed context, I think, to a psalm like Psalm 40 that David wrote that says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and will put their trust in him. He waited patiently for the Lord. He honored God's timing. He honored a broken king who sat ahead of him. He was faithful with whatever the next step was in front of him. Even though he knew clearly what God held before him out in the distance, he knew what the future was. But ultimately, that faithfulness in the in-between time and in that waiting was blessed by God. Well, eventually that shift happens. In the book of 2 Samuel, David's time finally came. 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4 say, All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. So for 15 years, David had to sit in that in-between time of waiting. He was faithful in the midst of all of that. And finally, God's call on David came to fruition. So my question and my challenge for you today and for this week and, well, for who knows how long in the midst of this growing pandemic, are you being faithful now? How are you doing with the wait during this in-between time? Sometimes we're so focused on the future that we fail to be faithful now. Sometimes we're so focused on the not yet that we waste the gift that we have in the present. So often we want to run ahead. We see the end in sight, and yet we try to get there before it's actually time. Someone said, I don't know who to attribute this to, but someone said, you can't outrun God's love, but you can outrun God's timing. And so let us be faithful in the wait. In these times of social distancing, of questions, of wondering, of fear and doubts about how all of this is going to end, may this time be a gift to you as you are faithful in the wait. May this time be a time of incubation. As seeds germinate and they grow, that you will produce fruit when God's timing is right. Well, be blessed, friends. Be faithful. And I hope at some point to see you and share with you live at English Chapel. Blessings to you all.
Thanks to Pastor Trevor Wright of the Journey at Christ Church in Findlay. We're so happy that you were able to join us for this chapel experience online, and we're so grateful for everything that you have done for us today and the things that you're doing for the folks in your community in Findlay. Just want to say again, thanks to everybody for tuning in this week. Next week, we're going to try to go live on Facebook Live on Thursday at 11 a.m., our regular chapel time. So next Thursday at 11 a.m., we'll be going live on Facebook Live. I'll be bringing the sermon that week, and we're going to try to have a time when we can just be together, even though we're not together. Even though we're social distancing, we are going to continue the social connections that we have as a community. So thanks again. Bye, and have a great week. And if you need anything, please get in touch with us at chapel@onu.edu. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of your social media. Have a blessed day.